Thank you for joining us for the Energy and Resilience Opportunities and Resources for California Tribes webinar. So I'll start off, well, actually, I'll have Pilar start off by introducing herself. Pilar, if you could share a little bit about your background and Quarles and Bradley.
Well, good morning, everybody. Where am I? I'm in Arizona. Good morning. I'm sorry, I'm not used to our time change now. So good morning. My name is Pilar Thomas. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Quarles and Brady. I'm located in Tucson, Arizona. Some of you may know me for the work that I did at the Department of Energy, at the Office of Indian Energy, back under the Obama administration, where I worked with tribes and tribal enterprises and other federal agencies on energy development in Indian country, especially around clean energy. My practice today is focused on tribal energy and economic development. I provide strategic legal advice and other policy and regulatory advice to tribes and tribal enterprises and others trying to do business on Indian lands, energy business on Indian lands, especially with respect to federal and state policies, such as what's been going on in California. So I'm looking forward to talking a little bit about what the state is doing from a regulatory perspective to promote energy resiliency and microgrid development on tribal lands in California. And with that, I will turn it over to Jana.
Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, where you might be. I'm getting used to this time change as well. I apologize that my camera isn't working today. As Josh said, it wouldn't be a webinar without some technical difficulty, and it falls to me today. So I am the Sustainability and Government Affairs Director for the Blue Lake Rancheria Tribe. It's a small nation located in Northwest California, and I join you from the ancestral lands of the Wiyot people. My role for the tribe includes strategic planning, policy, and program work within the tribal, state, and federal triangle, if you will, and infrastructure development across 5 primary lifeline sectors: energy, water, food, transportation, and telecommunications. In addition to my role with the tribe, I serve on several state and federal entities that address energy development and climate mitigation and adaptation. I'm the Pacific Region representative for the National Congress of American Indians Technical Committee for its Climate Action Task Force. I serve proudly as the tribal representative on the California SB 350 Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group, which advises the Public Utilities Commission and the Energy Commission on regulation and programs that seek to improve equity and resilience for tribes and other disadvantaged communities. I do also serve on the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, its California Intergovernmental Renewable Energy Task Force, where offshore floating wind is the topic of the day. And since 2014, I've served on the U.S. Department of Energy Indian Country Energy and Infrastructure Working Group, where I've had the good fortune to work with Pilar and others and hundreds of tribal nations on energy and related infrastructure development, and was co-elected chair of what we call ICWIG earlier this year. The Blue Lake Rancheria Tribe has invested in microgrids as part of an overall infrastructure strategy, and for that work is fairly widely recognized as a thought leader and change agent for the state of the art, really, of community scale distributed power, and how tribal and other communities can improve both their energy access and reliability. So more details on microgrids a bit later in this discussion, but I'm honored and very delighted to join you all for this discussion today. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Jana. Tom, since you'll talk a little more about why you're here, but why don't you, if you can introduce yourself quickly, that'd be great.
Yes, my name is Thomas Gates. I'm the tribal liaison at the Energy Commission, the California Energy Commission. I'm also the supervisor of the Cultural Resources unit in the environmental office. anthropologist. Started my career a long time ago with the Yurok tribe, which is just north of where Jana's from. Spent 18 years there as their cultural resources director, historic preservation officer, and self-governance officer. After a few stints with a couple environmental consulting firms here in Sacramento, and after 18 years at Yurok, I ended up at the Energy Commission. And so I've been at the Energy Commission now for 10 years, and happy to participate in this webinar, and look forward to talking a little bit later.
Thank you, Tom. Liz, is your audio working? I know you're having a little difficulty with your webcam.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Liz, yes, could you take a moment to introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and a little bit about GC Green?
Sure, no problem. Yes, my name is Elizabeth Perez, and I'm from Norfolk Rancheria. I come from Eagle Clan. We're in the exact center of California, and I'm a Navy veteran. I served 8 years active duty, 1 year in the reserves, and when I transitioned out in 2006, I got into construction, which later evolved into more of clean energy construction, and that's a large part of my background. I've been involved more on the energy national security side of things as a veteran, coming with that background. I served as a U.S. delegate for Israel and Japan and on energy and water issues, and also was honored at the White House as an energy champion of change for addressing clean energy technology and also addressing climate change. I was twice appointed by Governor Brown, and just recently transitioned from that role last October. And being owner of GC Green for the past 11 years, we work not only within the clean energy capacity and construction, but also more on creating energy resiliency for not just tribes, but also regarding national issues as well. And of course, creating a energy workforce movement. And I'm happy to talk about that more. And thank you for the opportunity to speak on the panel.
Thank you, Liz. And so I am Josh Simmons, President at Prosper Sustainably. Prior to founding Prosper Sustainably, I was the Environmental Director for the CNNS Chumash Environmental Office 2007-2014. I've been supporting tribes in the energy and climate space since 2014 and working on microgrid projects, capacity building programs, such as the Tribal Climate Health Project and tribalp2action.org. And so just excited to be here and share more information about the California Tribal Gap Analysis, microgrids, and other related topics. So without further ado, I'm gonna dive in a little bit more. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. I encourage everybody who's joined us to introduce yourself in the chat box. You could share your name, which tribe or organization you're with, and also if you came here today with something you want to learn, if you could share that as well, and we'll monitor that and try to address anything that you want to learn or any questions that you have as well. So as I mentioned, I'm going to be covering the California Tribal Gap Analysis that we recently kicked off, and Tom can share a little more information about that as well. Pilar is going to provide an overview and discuss opportunities relating to CPUC's microgrids proceeding. Jen and I are going to go through a microgrid project planning process and implementation and talk through various steps. Liz is going to share more information and resources and some of what they're doing regarding microgrid project workforce development. Jen and I will circle back to share funding and other resources for tribal microgrid projects. And then throughout, I encourage you all to just enter your questions in the questions box. And we'll likely save them to the end, but if something comes up, then please share. So, okay, well, as Shasta pointed out, there is no chat box. Interesting. So, share questions or however you want to share, introduce yourself. We appreciate it. Hopefully you all can see it, and we'll just dive right in. So Tom, how about you kick us off to talk about the California Tribal Gap Analysis?
Okay, so 2 years ago, there was a tribal energy summit. It was a state energy commission and the Public Utilities Commission sponsored event. The Pechanga tribe hosted the event. Pilar was the MC facilitator of that event, did a great job. I think Jana Gagnon, who is going to be talking later, was one of the I would say the brains behind that, put a lot of thought into how we would do that. So that was almost exactly 2 years ago. Now I know the wheels of government go slow. It took us 8 to 9 months to just get out the report from that event. It was well attended by tribes, and that report here it is. It can be found. Well, there it is. It can be found on our website at the Energy Commission. And I was just going through some of the findings and recommendations, and one of the recommendations that came out of there was a long-term recommendation. There were a number of short-term ones, which were some of those were identifying funding sources that the state might have available to tribes, setting up funding programs for tribal energy development in ways that incentivized and encouraged tribes to participate in these state programs. And we've been doing that, and we can talk about that in a bit, some of those examples. But one of the long-term recommendations was the state should conduct a California-wide Native American tribal energy assessment and gap analysis. So 2 years ago, that's what we said would be a long-term goal. Here we are today launching that effort. The steps in between, that was a great idea. The first thing, and hats off to Commissioner Douglas, who is not on this call, but is on another a conference right at the moment. But Commissioner Douglas worked with my office. We secured some funds. They were actually some leftover American Recovery Act and restoration funds that the Energy Commission still had their hands on. And we did two things with the $2.25 million that we secured. We opened up a tribal energy and climate change planning grant program called the Tribal Government Challenge that is being run in collaboration with the Strategic Growth Council, which is another state agency under the Office of Planning and Research. We've got most of those grants into contract, and we're going forward with those planning grants for, I think, up to 10 tribes or 11 tribes throughout California. Some of that funding, we actually moved into a contract to do the gap analysis that we had identified so long ago. And I should say that I'm really pleased that Prosper Sustainably won that award competitively. And here they are launching it. The last thing I would say is that Prosper Sustainably is a company, but they have a great team. Liz, who is on our call today, is one of those team members. I think Rick is another team member. But I'll let Josh introduce his own team. But I have great hopes for the endeavor that we're launching. I think it will give us, as long as we get the participation that we anticipate, I think we're going to have a great report out of that. And of course, it's going to take a year to get that done. In the meantime, we're going to keep our eye on the ball with the funding opportunities and the grant opportunities that we're putting out and will continue to put out. We think in the end of the day, this is all going to lead to a better relationship between state government and the tribes of California. So with that, thanks again, Josh, for putting this together. Happy to see you, Pilar, and look forward to the rest of the webinar.
Great, thank you so much, Tom. Yeah, so thanks for kicking that off and sharing a little bit of context and background on that. So we've just started fairly recently the tribal gap analysis project, kind of end of summer was when we really first started getting rolling. And so the primary goals are to identify tribal priorities, needs, and barriers in the areas of clean energy and climate change. And within clean energy, we're talking about energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy storage, and clean transportation. And in climate change, we're focusing on climate adaptation and resilience. Another goal is to provide recommendations for state programs, funding, technical assistance, et cetera. We want the recommendations coming out of this gap analysis to provide information to the state to be able to develop more resources for tribes to address the needs, the barriers, the priorities that have been identified by the tribes that participate. And furthermore, we're also seeking to advance collaboration and build relationships between the tribes and state agencies, and also between the state agencies that are trying to work together and developing more assistance programs for tribes. I also want to emphasize that this gap analysis is not limited to federally recognized tribes. We are covering all tribes regardless of recognition status in the state of California. And so, we encourage you to share this with tribes throughout the state regardless. So Tom already talked about the state committee team on this. This is CEC funding being administered by the Strategic Growth Council. Our team includes so myself, President of Prosper Sustainably. Angie Hacker is the CEO of Prosper Sustainably. She is, I've been focusing primarily on energy-related projects for tribes, and she's focused more on climate adaptation-related projects for tribes. So you may have met her through the Tribal Climate Health Project and all the work that she's doing with Shasta Gone, who works for Paula, but who's separately on this project team as an independent contractor. And she has a wealth of experience and working with tribes, and I'm sure many, if not all of you, know who Shasta is. So Liz already introduced herself, and GC Green, and so we're excited to have them as a team member. We also have the UCLA Luskin Center, who actually has other Strategic Growth Council contracts for I think they're on the transformative climate communities and other projects. And so we're really excited for them, and they're going to be focused on the data analysis piece of this project. So we really are leveraging their tremendous and extensive experience in data analysis and these types of questionnaires and these types of projects. And they have a lot of energy and climate related experience as well. And then also Sage Energy, particularly Dustin Jolly, who also worked for the Yurok tribe, and they're based up in Northern California as well. And so he's going to be on this project as an advisor. So I'm not going to stay on this slide, but Prosper Sustainably is a woman-owned business. We've been serving tribes in these areas, doing grant writing, project and program planning, and project management. And then I mentioned the Tribal Climate Health Project and Tribal Pollution Prevention Action Project. These are both administered by the Paula Band of Mission Indians, and we are implementing them on their behalf. So a little more about the California Tribal Gap Analysis. So there's kind of two primary benefits to tribes in participating in this. I think the first and foremost is informing the state's clean energy and climate change programs for tribes. I think, more than anything else, we want to ensure that there are more and more funding opportunities that come from the state to serve tribes' needs in these areas. And this is, a useful, I wouldn't say starting point. There are certainly a lot of funding and other opportunities out there, but this is going to be, I think, going to hopefully coalesce into additional opportunities. But it's challenging for the state to move forward without this information for tribes to tell them exactly what they would like to see funding and other support for. As I mentioned, we're talking about energy efficiency, renewable energy, energy storage, clean transportation, and then climate adaptation and resilience. So thinking about, think about this as an opportunity for you to help drive and guide future state investments in these areas for tribes. We also, through this California Tribal Gap Analysis, we want to share more information about current energy and climate funding and opportunities for California tribes, such as the ones we're talking about today, focusing on microgrids. So Pilar is going to talk about the microgrids proceeding, the opportunities that's presenting itself. Jenna and I are going to talk about additional funding opportunities for tribal microgrid projects, and Liz is going to share opportunities relating to workforce development. So we're trying to get a landscape of what actually is out there, and we want to share that information. So, I think part of a gap may be just a level of awareness, and we want to, at least hopefully through this project, bridge that gap. And so we want to kind of generally share that, but for tribes that participate, we're also seeking to issue a customized report to them that is going to share the specific funding opportunities, funding and other opportunities and resources available to the tribe at that specific location. So the graphic on the left side kind of shows the relationship between all of the groups that are participating in this. So under Prosper Sustainably in the center here, we have the other team members I already discussed, and we have the information we're gathering is going back to the state through the state committee, which is a collaboration between the California Energy Commission and Strategic Growth Council. The main driver behind this project in the upper right is California tribes. That's where the main source of information, the primary data in this project is coming from all of you, from the tribes that you represent. And we want to hear from you what exactly your specific needs and goals are, so we can relay that information and develop recommendations to address those needs and goals. We'll also be talking to various tribal serving agencies and organizations, focusing on California, but also beyond, and gathering information from them regarding specific opportunities that they are aware of, resources that they're aware of, and anything that they're working on, and also their perspective on gaps and recommendations. So, we're also going to be asking tribes and these agencies for your recommendations too, for incorporation into the report. We'll also be doing some secondary data research as well. So, going and do some research on existing reports and data sets to complement the information we get from tribes. We're going to seek to flesh that out a bit more, but the primary focus here is going to be reaching out to tribes. So the key steps, this project is going to go from, started in the summer, just this past summer, and the contract ends in March 2022. We are seeking to have the final report essentially completed by the end of 2021. All this is going to revolve around developing questionnaires for tribes, and then separate kind of questionnaires for the tribal serving agencies and organizations, but mainly going out to tribes and with this questionnaire and interviewing them on their specific clean energy and climate related needs, goals, and recommendations. So we are currently in the process of developing the questionnaire. Pretty shortly, we're going to be asking tribes to participate to pilot the questionnaire. So we want tribes to help guide and refine the final questionnaire that we use to reach out to all tribes across the state. And so that's an invitation right now. I'll share more information about that in a moment. And then once we get that final questionnaire, we'll then issue it out to all tribes. But if we're happy to have as many tribes that want to participate as pilots to help guide us right now. And so if you're interested, please reach out to us. I'll share information on how to do that next slide. So as I mentioned, we're going to be issuing customized reports to tribes that participate. We want to share the available funding resources and other opportunities for tribes at their specific location. We also want to provide a summary of the information that was shared, just so we ensure that you can see the information that you're sharing, and you can help validate it. You can provide additional information, provide corrections and clarifications. So we want this not just to be we're going to have you complete a questionnaire and then you don't have an opportunity to adjust things as needed. There's going to be various perspectives within each tribal government, tribal community. And so we want to, help capture those and merge those together as well. So the interviews and the questionnaire could be completed by multiple people from the same tribe. So then as we gather that data, we'll be conducting data collection and analysis, primarily supported by the UCLA Luskin Center. And with that analysis, we'll prepare and present findings for the state and for the tribes. We're going to present those findings at a state-sponsored event, I believe hosted by the CEC and Strategic Growth Council. And also we want to submit that report around and get feedback from tribes and update that report as with that feedback that we receive. So we encourage you to get involved. Here's what you can do right now. You can go to, we have a website, caltribalgapanalysis.org. So I encourage you to go on there and at minimum, hopefully sign up for our email list, so subscribe for ongoing project updates. But if you are a tribal leader or tribal staff or represent a tribe, I hope you will also go to the form on that website and indicate your interest in participating in the questionnaire through an interview, either through web conference or phone call, perhaps in person, depending on when COVID lets up. And also just immediately, being a pilot tribe to help us develop and refine the questions that we're working on right now. So I hope you will go to our website and register your interest in participating in this project. And you also can contact us through that website and feel free to email me at any time, email or call me with any questions. Contact information is on the website. And then on the left side, you can see that's just that's the form, the top of the form. And there's just a very brief questions to kind of register your interest in this project. Okay, so I'm gonna now pass it over to Pilar. I encourage everybody to ask questions, and if we have time at the end, I will spend some time. And if we don't have enough time, then I will send a follow-up email responding to the questions that we have about the California Tribal Gap Analysis Project. All right, Pilar, I'll turn it over to you. Let me hand you the control. Do you have a slide? Do you want me to hand you the controls?
I do have slides, so that'd be great.
Should have control now. There we go.
Okay, so let's get the right screen. Where are we? All right, do we see my screen?
Yeah.
Yep,
The CPUC Microgrid Rulemaking?
that's right.
Okay, very good. I don't see it on the other. Everybody's got a different platform. It's making me crazy. Well, again, thank you, Josh. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to spend a little bit of time just walking folks through what's happening in the state of California under the California Public Utility Commission with recent rulemaking, and by recent, over the last couple of years, related to energy resiliency, and some near-term rulemaking that came out related to microgrid development. So I'm going to go through kind of just to set the stage around microgrid, and Josh and Jenna will get into this in more detail, but just to kind of set the stage, I'll start off by talking about kind of what are microgrids, why might tribes be interested in doing them. I'm going to summarize what the CPUC rulemaking covered, how it explicitly covers tribal governments, how it applies to the 3 investor-owned utilities in California, SDG&E, Southern California Edison, and PG&E. We'll take a look at kind of what's still pending and what tribes might be interested in continuing to monitor and comment on. And then of the 3 IOUs, only one, PG&E, has actually put together an implementation plan that has been approved by the CPUC. So microgrids, why do them? Lots of reasons, same basic reasons why you might want to do a clean energy or renewable energy project or a distributed energy project. But this microgrid proceeding is really focused on reliability and access to power, and the heightened awareness in California with respect to wildfires and the new method that the IOUs have of dealing with fire risk is to de-energize their lines and shut off the power to everybody. And so I'm sure everybody on the call has had this experience. I don't think any IOU has not done this in the last year or two. Everybody, obviously, depending on where you are, could last a couple of hours, could last a couple of days. In some circumstances, it has lasted a week or more. So lots of real energy reliability issues, resiliency issues, but a whole host of other benefits on why to do microgrids on tribal lands. A quick picture of a microgrid. They're all different, of course, but the major aspects to them are really that they are localized load and generation resource. So in that distribution system where the power is being used, that normally are connected and are synchronous with the big grid, but can be disconnected and function autonomously. And so you have to have some key components to the microgrid in order for the islanding effect to be to happen. You can use any type of course, renewable, especially renewables that you can scale down, like solar, like wind, fuel cells that might be supported by biomass or some other type of renewable resource, hydrogen. You'll have, of course, the need for some kind of baseline or base load or firm power source. So a lot of times that's diesel engines, but they could also be fuel cells. And then you have usually now batteries and solar plus storage, big battery banks. Janet will talk about the only tribe with functioning microgrids right now. And so she'll talk about kind of there, but that's their components: solar, storage, diesel. But you can have a whole host of different types of generation in there. And you're going to, of course, have the magic box that I call it, that regulation and conversion box in the schematic here, where all the magic happens. It's the software program that helps you manage your loads, helps you manage your generation, moves you from one generation source to another within this system, and is the brains behind the organization. So what did the CPUC rulemaking cover? First of all, it implements Senate Bill 1339, which was passed in 2018. That Senate bill was focused on energy resiliency, and it explicitly required the CPUC to develop standards, protocols, guidelines, methods, rates, and tariffs to support and reduce barriers to microgrid deployment statewide, but still continuing to prioritize safety, public health, and avoiding cost shifts between ratepayers. Because once you put the microgrid system in, it's typically behind, quote unquote, behind the meter, where if you're using it to help offset your energy costs, you're using your own power more often than not, or at least maybe more of the time. You're going to be avoiding costs. You're going to be avoiding paying the utility company. And there's always a concern, just like there is with rooftop solar, that you're going to have cost shifting between ratepayers, and especially around fixed costs, and potential stranded costs. So CPUC has a full plate, not this is what they do, but it's a full plate to try and figure out how to, in effect, commercialize and mass deploy microgrids as part of this energy resiliency effort. So the rulemaking, the decision that was issued, this decision was issued in June. It's a kind of track one, they call it. There's 2 or 3 other tracks ongoing in this broader rulemaking. But this particular decision, which was issued in June, is more of a short-term approach to trying to get the IOUs kick-started on implementation. So the decision requires the regulated utilities, as I said, the 3 IOUs, to develop and implement programs that commercialize and deploy microgrids and other resiliency projects. So it's not limited to microgrids. There are other types of projects that can be done. San Diego Gas and Electric, for example, has not put together a microgrid implementation plan. Instead, what they've put together is a proposal to roll out some distribution system regulatory mechanism, regulation mechanism. So they're worried about regulating generation within their distribution grid from a technical standpoint. So that's their resiliency effort. San Diego Gas and Electric does have a microgrid program that they want to deploy, where they would be the owner or operator of the microgrid system. And you'll see how PG&E is a little bit different than that. But for purposes of this rulemaking, right now, really only PG&E has put something together, waiting for the other two utilities to put something out there. But the utilities must, through this rulemaking, develop and implement standardized, pre-approved system designs for interconnection of resiliency projects, which include microgrid, to deliver energy services during grid outages. So again, this is all focused around this public safety shutoff program that the IOUs are doing, leaving people without power. They also need to develop and implement methods to increase simplicity and transparency of the processes by which they operate to inspect, evaluate, and approve a project. And they're supposed to prioritize interconnection of resiliency projects for key locations, facilities, or customers. So we'll see in a little bit more detail, the 3 IOU implementation plans that are required have to cover at least these 3 aspects: interconnecting microgrid projects through some type of pre-approved standardized design template. So everybody knows what that microgrid system has to look like. That eases development, it eases design costs, it eases negotiation with the IOU. They also have to propose net metering tariffs, and especially around storage. So most of these microgrids now have batteries in them. There are some limitations on how you would be able to net meter batteries. They've lifted some of those limitations. So for example, now in the old days, before they made this change, if you had a battery and you were trying to charge the battery from the grid, and then you use the battery, you didn't get net metering credit for that because the battery was being charged from the grid. Well, now the CPUC has changed that. Now they're saying you can charge your battery from the grid, especially in anticipation of a shutoff event. And then we will now net meter your battery. So people are now not being, before there was a disincentive. Now they want to incentivize so that people have access to power when the grid gets shut down. So if you don't have enough solar power to charge your battery and you have to charge your battery from the grid, you will now get net metering credit for it because you're discharging your battery for purposes of providing power when you can't get power otherwise. And the third key aspect is this requirement for tribal and local government collaboration and outreach requirements and workshop requirements and information sharing requirements with tribal governments and other local governments, which would include the CCAs. Some tribes are a part of a CCA, a community choice aggregation entity. Other tribes aren't, but the CCAs are included in this collaboration requirement. Specifically around tribal and local government collaboration, they're supposed to conduct semi-annual workshops at the county level, again, with tribal and local governments to discuss transmission, distribution, what their investment and operational plans are, how they're going to incorporate tribal, local government input, and any other collaborative planning sessions. They're supposed to involve tribes in planning and vetting their utility actions that will impact the tribal community. They have a responsibility now to educate tribal and local government leaders and staff on what they intend to invest in their area around transmission and distribution, assist tribes and other local governments with crafting energy resiliency projects. So this is part of a technical assistance effort that they're supposed to put together, and then develop and publish a resiliency project engagement guide so that the tribes and local governments know how they are going to engage with the utilities, best practices around that for successful implementation, and the types of data requirements the utilities will have. So a huge step forward that the CPUC is requiring these utilities to work with tribes on developing microgrid projects and engaging on a regular basis with tribes and local governments to make this happen. Okay, so PG&E has developed what's called the Community Microgrid Enablement Program, CMEP, and they have laid out some very specific examples If you want more detail on it, I would encourage you, I'm happy to email Joshua if anybody's interested, the advice letter that the CPUC put out. It's only about 120 pages, but I'm sorry, the PG&E put out that goes into more detail on how this program is going to work. And so if you have request more information, I would encourage you, ask me for this, I'll email it to you or send you the link to it. But in summary, and PG&E has the most tribes in its footprint, 35 tribes or so in PG&E's footprint. And it provides a model for those utilities that don't have a program implemented yet for the tribes in SDG&E territory or in Southern California Edison territory, to go out to their utilities, reach out to the tribal relations person, and try and find out where those two IOUs are with implementing this rule, this decision. But from PG&E's perspective, here's what they've put together. They've got kind of a four-pronged strategy. One is to develop technical and financial resources and support for community requested microgrids. You have to go to them. So they're looking for tribes or other local governments or CCAs to come to them with a proposed project. That's why Josh and Jana, as they go through kind of how you develop a microgrid project, getting a project as far along as you can, so that you can bring it to PG&E or to your other utility and get it ready in the hopper. But they're looking to provide technical and financial assistance support. Technical assistance focuses on project scoping, how big, data sharing, initial design work, and project management. And PG&E's proposal, it basically will take you, maybe not from soup, but pretty close, all the way to nuts, getting you designed, implemented, helping you construct it, and working with you on even operations and maintenance. They're going to be focused on critical infrastructure, though, so public safety, healthcare, schools, water systems, community centers, senior centers. I think a lot of tribes could argue their casinos and hotel complexes are critical infrastructure. Jana can talk to that about how they use the casino and hotel when they get shut off for power to feed people and house people. And then there's a commitment for financial support, about $27 million in cost offsetting funds. There's going to be a lot of infrastructure upgrades that have to occur within the distribution system, within the substation system for microgrids to be successful and to be successfully implemented and interconnected. So PG&E is committed to 27 million. 9 million has been devoted of the 27, 9 million for disadvantaged communities, which includes tribal lands. So there's a priority or a preference for tribes in the investment of distribution system upgrades, in critical infrastructure, and in terms of vulnerable, low-income, disadvantaged rural and tribal communities. So higher up the preference list. They also will provide support to tribal and local governments, including advice on the type of projects that can be expedited, either permitting and interconnection, and providing the necessary pre-project information. You need to know your load, your customer profile, what kind of infrastructure situation you have. So they will work with you on putting that together, and they've got a dedicated staff both for outreach and for technical assistance on this. Last slide, next steps. So they have a track 2 underway that's a little bit more technical than anything else. One key next step is following up with the IOUs, the other 2 IOUs, on where they are with their implementation plan for this microgrid decision that came out in June. But the CPUC will be working on a whole host of other issues, including separate tariffs and rates, how we develop certain types of infrastructure. They now have a series of questions out, comment period closed earlier October, on the issue of using diesel engines in microgrids and how to start to migrate these microgrids off of diesel and onto clean energy. I call it base load. It's really kind of firm power. But how do we get off of diesel engines, which have their own issues, of course, from an environmental standpoint, and of course require you to have a bunch of diesel oil laying around? And how do we get onto cleaner and renewable energy, cleaner energy sources to replace diesel engines? So they're now out there asking the technical people, but there's a whole host of both technical and policy questions that are still working their way through this rulemaking. And so to the extent that, one, there's an interest in trying to see what the CPUC is doing, because all of this will affect your ability to do energy resiliency and microgrid projects on tribal lands. So not all of this stuff is going to be important to tribes. Some of it will be important to some tribes. Others of it will be important to other tribes. So obviously, whatever is the most important to your tribal community or what you're trying to do from an energy development standpoint, focus on some of these. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Josh, and happy to take, I think we're taking questions later, Josh, or now?
I'm encouraging people to put questions in the chat box since we have a chock full agenda, and hopefully we'll have time at the end to respond. We don't have any questions as of right now, but I encourage you continue to ask questions specific to Pilar. And thanks, Pilar. I mean, I working on a lot of microgrid projects, and this was an introduction for me as well. It's challenging. I'll just share this. I've been involved in the SGIP proceeding on behalf of some tribes, particularly Paul, San Pasqual, and Rincon, regarding some tribal eligibility for the equity resilience budget. And it's there are specific opportunities that are being developed for tribal communities, and there isn't much involvement by tribes in these. I think partially because they're so complex, but. I think I encourage you to, monitor this and to provide input to guide these opportunities, just to ensure that as they're developed by the CPUC, that they're actually meeting the tribal needs. Otherwise, they're kind of developing them based on what their best assumption are on how to do that. Although first, I'll encourage you to participate in the California Tribal Gap Analysis, and then go to the Microgrids proceeding and participate there as well. But, we have an opportunity, I think, to also share information regarding microgrids and storage and other things related to CPU proceedings, and we'll certainly share those findings with the CPUC. Okay, thank you, Pilar.
Josh, let me just quickly add with respect to kind of monitoring. This California is light years ahead of almost every other state except maybe New York in terms of rulemaking and proceedings around distributed energy, microgrids, renewable energy, energy resiliency. And this stuff can certainly get very technically complicated. But the key challenge and opportunity for tribes is not necessarily to dig into the weeds of the technical issues, because there's plenty of people doing that. But it's at least at a minimum understand what the opportunities are and then to make your voice heard. It takes nothing to write a comment letter and to remind the CPUC to remember that there are tribes out here. It takes nothing to read through, especially the some of the equity organizations. I wouldn't worry about the guys, the microgrid gurus who are talking about all the technical issues, but pay attention to people like Vote Solar or Californians for Clean Energy, or some of those broader groups who aren't necessarily going to be commenting on the technical aspects, but will be commenting on the equity aspects. And that's important to know. There was not a single tribe that has commented yet on these microgrid proceedings. And so nonetheless, the CPUC threw us into the mix. So we show up in the rulemaking, explicitly show up in the rulemaking and the decision anyway. But we can't always depend on an enlightened CPUC today, because 5 years ago, you wouldn't have even heard the word tribe in a CPUC proceeding, other than some big project in the middle of the desert. So the good news is there's been great movement at the CEC, at the CPUC, especially over the last 2 or 3 years, to really try and incorporate tribes. And now there's a huge opportunity for tribes to continue to raise their voice, contribute to the conversation. And again, it doesn't have to be 25 pages long like some folks do. A 1 or 2 page letter letting people know what the tribal equities are, what things are important to you, can go a long way, especially in front of a board like the CPUC, who's looking for this input and is constantly asking for it. So I encourage you to take some time, send a letter, comment letter. It's easy, not that hard, doesn't cost a lot of money, but it keeps tribes in the mix, so to speak, even if we're not necessarily trying to substantively contribute to the technical conversations. We're contributing to the equity conversations, and that's almost more important.
And I'll just add, and perhaps this is, information on how to contribute and participate in these proceedings can be part of the tribal gap analysis and the information we share. The CPUC does have a tribal policy that does allow for tribal participation in proceedings that is different than a standard party. So tribes actually have more leeway in how they can contribute to these proceedings and influence them. And I think it's because of the efforts of Paul, yourself, and Tom, and Jana, and all the things that we're doing, and I think many people who have participated in this webinar are doing through the Tribal Energy Summits, and through through the gap analysis and all the things that have been happening in between that are actually allowing the CPUC and the CEC to understand and get a better grasp of what the needs and the goals are. But I think more engagement is only going to help and drive more resources toward tribes. So Pilar, there is a question in the chat box. I'm not gonna address it right now, but you could also respond to it. I think in a response, you can respond to everybody too as well in the meantime, and we can come back to the end if we have time. Okay, so I'm gonna move on to tribal microgrid project planning. And I wanna save the bulk of the time for Jana to talk about her experience as a Blue Lake Rancheria, which I think is, not only just a tribal flagship microgrid project, but perhaps just a flagship microgrid project in general, and she'll share and explain why. Before she gets into some of the details, I just want to provide a planning a microgrid project overview in a nutshell. And so I actually did a similar presentation, or a full presentation on this at the 2020 Tribal Lands and Environment Forum. I believe it's still available on demand. I'm going to try to find the link and forward to everybody. But I'll briefly walk through this process, which is really just kind of a general kind of construction planning project process, or any kind of energy related project process. But I think first thing that all tribes can, and I believe should be doing off the bat, is developing a strategic energy and resilience plan. And really that sets the stage for the types of actions you want to be taking in these areas, not beyond just microgrids, beyond just resilience, but in the area of clean energy, or just meeting energy needs in general. And then that flows down into the first step, which is identifying the microgrid related needs, goals, objectives, and scope. Your goals should actually already have been stated. Hopefully, if you develop a strategic energy and resilience plan, you'll have goals that you can easily pull from there. And then when you focus on the microgrid, you can get kind of more specific. And then scope is really about defining what are those critical facilities for your community? How does your community define critical? How does your tribe define a critical facility, and ensuring that those are considered for the scope of any microgrid project. Next key step is, and these are iterative steps, you'll certainly be going back and forth between them, but completing a feasibility study and preliminary analysis on the project. And there's a variety of tools that I've used in this, just for, even generally solar plus storage energy tool base, Homer, there's PVSys, there's SAM, I believe, system advisor tool for the DOE. And so a lot of information. Certainly you need to, before proceeding any further, you have to determine whether or not a project is feasible. And Jana's going to talk about some considerations for feasibility of a tribal microgrid project that you may not consider until further down the road, and you'd want to consider ahead of time. I think in particular, broadband infrastructure. Conducting microgrid project procurement is another key step. There's a variety of ways to go about this. You could actually do design engineering first. You can procure that and then system out for full procurement, or you could just do procurement to get a full turnkey system, including design engineering. But who are you going to hire? How are you going to hire them? What are your tribal procurement policies? But just ensuring that you're getting competitive bids for your project. And I use the procurement process as a way to learn a bit more about what are some different ways to design, and I'll tend to gather lessons learned from a variety of contract proposals or project proposals and merge them together into the final project. There's the designing and engineering phase of the project, which is going to should include your permitting interconnection application, which can take a long time. But this is where you're really going to get to at least your 60% and then up to your full design engineering for the project. That's going to consider all the electrical infrastructure and physical infrastructure for the facility. And after you've completed design engineering, you'll then proceed, assuming you've secured funding for all of this, you'll proceed to construction of the system and then commissioning and deploying the microgrid so that it now is providing the energy and resilience that your community needs. And then after you deployed it, conducting the ongoing operations and maintenance, which is still fairly technical. It's not just, it's not as simple as just a solar PV system that you can kind of just rely upon hands off and, just monitor for errors. The microgrid controls, there's a significant software, perhaps even 50% of this microgrid is going to be, cost is going to be focused on software and ensuring that it's operating in a way that's going to optimize cost if it's a grid connected one, and cost savings, and then also that it can enter into island mode when the power goes out to ensure that you have power and sufficient power meeting those critical facilities and critical loads. So again, I'll send the link over to the Tribal Lands and Environment Forum for the webinar where I went through these steps in detail. And I'm going to, hand it over to Jenna. Jenna, just tell me when you want me to flip through the slides for you.
Sure. Thank you, Josh. Just flip to the second one, please. There we go. So, when we prepare for these kinds of webinars, sometimes it's difficult to know what kind of technical detail to provide, what kind of context to provide. So I'm taking my own individual approach to this, but I want to preface everything that I have to say today by a real recognition of the people that are on this webinar, Josh, Pilar Thomas, Tom Gates, Liz. These are people who are in the trenches with their sleeves rolled up, working on these issues every day from a variety of perspectives. What's happened from these sorts of expertise these sorts of expert teams is that I think the relationship between the state of California and tribal nations within California, and there are 109 federally recognized tribal nations in California and dozens of non-federally recognized tribal nations in California, that really the coordination and the engagement between the states and the state and tribes has never been better. And as Pilar was mentioning, what we see come out of that relationship is, even though many tribes might not have the time to or the capacity to engage on these critical energy infrastructure issues, it's happening anyway, because we have thought leadership in tribal nations and we have thought leadership in the state agencies like the California Energy Commission and the California Public Utilities Commission that are really extraordinarily focused on these kinds of issues and the equity and resilience components of them. So I just want to start there because it's something that I feel very strongly about. And with the strength of this kind of relationship, we've been able to push forward many solutions that will be creating benefits for tribal nations and help the state achieve its goals as well. So with that, let me just talk about what's happening at the Blue Lake Rancheria. First of all, we, among our energy strategic planning and considerations, we center global climate change because it's clearly amplifying local issues that are typical and creating new issues for us that we've never seen before. So with respect to energy, obviously nuisance power outages have always been common on the north coast of California just because of we're behind the redwood curtain in a geographically isolated and pretty tenuously connected region, but they're getting a little bit worse. So we've seen rolling outages. This is due to the heat dome or the heat storm that descended over the entire western half of the United States in August and September. And because of that, we weren't able to import our typical out-of-state reserves to help balance the grid. So other people took some of their electrical loads offline to help, and microgrids at the Blue Lake Rancheria were part of that, and I'll get to a little bit more detail on that in a minute. We're also seeing, as has been mentioned, these public safety power shutoffs. This is a proactive and now necessary mechanism to avoid these catastrophic wildfires like you see in the image here from September of this year that can be caused by the electrical system. This is not something that anybody wants to deal with, but it is a tool in the toolbox to be able to prevent these kinds of deadly wildfires. As Pilar mentioned, these PSPS outages are projected to last from 2 to 10 days, and they're projected to be necessary for at least the next decade. So we have to plan and build for that. There's just no getting around it. So, you know, the climate impacts obviously have increased wildfires and air pollution, but it's also caused supply disruptions. So we saw constrictions to diesel fuel delivery to the North Coast in the midst of all these wildfires. Almost all the arterials, road arterials that serve our region were closed simultaneously at about the time frame that this photo was taken. Plus, we have the other climate issues that are impacting our energy sector. For all of us on the North Coast, sea level rise combines with seismic impacts and other issues to create threats to our Anchor Power Plant, which also has a nuclear waste site adjacent to it. Next slide, please. So in our microgrid feasibility and design phase, we had these contexts. We want to transition to climate smart infrastructure as soon as possible for the reasons that we just discussed. We want to improve our continuity of operations for social and economic benefit. We want to improve community health by reducing pollution and improving all the power supported needs that our community has for their healthcare. And we treat these microgrid investments as economy enabling. So we have seen job creation, lower and more predictable costs, and increased expertise and local capacity, both within the tribal nation, but then obviously across the region as several microgrids have been built in our area. Reliable energy supports, this is part of our strategic plan, the lifeline sectors. So we look at water, food, transportation, and communications in great detail, and including how all of these things are increasingly overlapping as we look for climate solutions. So for example, as we electrify transportation and we move toward these accelerated goals of, you know, no new gasoline powered cars by 2035, which I think is fantastic, we're going to need the electrons to make this happen. And so we need to think about that, obviously. But if all of these infrastructure sectors are done well, obviously a benefit stack of social, economic, and environmental improvements result. And so as a part of our plan, we identified critical infrastructure and our power needs, and almost every tribal nation has a long list of infrastructure that in business as usual operates one way and in emergencies operates another. So your police station or emergency operations center, your cooling center and clean air shelters, your water systems and wastewater systems, your just healthcare facilities and other gas stations and convenience stores, grocery stores. All of these are critical infrastructure. They all need good, reliable power on any given day, but in emergencies, we need to make sure that those facilities are available to serve the tribal community and the region. Ideally, you would identify those, and then of course you dig down deeper and you identify what kinds of loads, electrical loads, do you need to support, and that gets more technical, but it was actually a fairly enjoyable part of the whole process. So I can give you details on that if you need it. Another big part of it is to identify internal capacity that you may have, internal capacity that you may need to build, and then where you don't have that capacity or expertise, how you're going to source it from external partners. So I'll talk more about that in a second. And then overarching, we need to address this climate crisis. We need to power toward zero carbon solutions as fast as possible. And we need to do it in a way where we're dealing with these new emergencies that are already here with low or zero carbon solutions that as we adapt, we don't make the core problem even worse. So we want to change it from a vicious cycle to a virtuous cycle. And the tribe has a goal of achieving greenhouse gas emissions, just zeroing those out by 2030. Next slide, please. So a little bit about one of our microgrids. The tribe has actually several, one at the community scale, one this facility scale microgrid, and then two that are in development, one of the campus scale, and another one, actually two more that are at the campus scale. And all of them were done with public-private partnerships. And I can't stress enough how critical and fundamental this has been to the microgrid build out. We partner extensively with our local university and the Energy Research Center there, and I highly recommend that tribes that are interested in developing microgrids, any communities that are developing microgrids, establish a relationship with your local university, particularly if they have a strong engineering department or an ongoing energy research platform that you can kind of tie into. We have partnered with student classes in the engineering department to do initial feasibility studies on our solar, our battery storage, our economics, and other technical feasibility components. We've partnered with the Schatz Energy Research Center at Humboldt State University on grant funding, particularly the California Energy Commission's EPIC program, which I can give you details, but it's an extraordinary ratepayer funded program for R&D in these kinds of systems, and it's been that has, in addition to the tribal government funding, has been one of our key sources of financing for these projects. And then you have your technology providers, and we work with national labs and other research facilities to do things like hardware in the loop testing of the system before it goes live, training for staff, and those kinds of things. So the other partnership I really want to stress is the partnership that we've developed with PG&E. Investor-owned utilities 10 years ago, microgrids and distributed generation were pretty firmly outside their core business focus. Today, it's completely reversed, and people are, and those investor-owned utilities like PG&E are really hyper-focused on the strategy here. We have found that working early and often with PG&E has provided significant benefits for our project, understanding the interconnection issues, understanding the safety issues, making sure that the utility understands what the tribal nation vision is for its energy build out, which includes all this context that I've talked about. So as Pilar did an excellent job of summarizing microgrid operation, I'm just going to say that all the tribe's microgrids incorporate solar photovoltaics, large-scale battery storage, and automated or advanced, her black box, advanced microgrid control systems and advanced building systems that are tied into that to control everything and make it work efficiently, both for economics, but then when we're islanded from the grid and operating under our own power, just to make sure that that all balances and is operating well. And so why is it important to create microgrids at the facility scale? One of the reasons is because in many tribal nations, we developed this solar plus microgrid at our gas station and convenience store. And many tribes have these kinds of facilities, but also they may be the only kind of publicly accessible facility that can deliver the lifeline sectors of energy, water, food, transportation, and communications in an emergency. And we need to make sure that A, they have reliable emergency power, and B, it's done with a lower carbon footprint than just wheeling in a diesel generator like we've talked about. Next slide, please. So I just want to briefly talk about how it's working in real world scenarios. So on October 9th, 2019, we experienced in our region the first public safety power shutoff. Again, these are pre-planned outages grid-wide that are meant to prevent catastrophic wildfires. So it's, you know, it's not a great situation either way. It is the lesser of two sort of dangerous situations. But this was the first one, and it basically, our region was pretty unprepared. With the exception of the Blue Lake Rancheria tribe and a few other places that have really kind of looked into the future and foreseen the need for robust backup power. And so in that October 2019 PSPS event, we were able to do all of these items that are listed here. We could supply the general public and emergency response agencies with power. We provided critical powered medical housing in our hotel. So people who need powered medical equipment could were housed in the hotel, and we were credited with saving 4 lives in that event, which still gets me a little bit emotional, but remember, this is because we just kept the power on in a way that that worked. And so so this becomes even more important as we are increasingly dependent on our electronic communication devices, our computers, our cell phones, and electric vehicles. So our electric vehicle charging stations were extremely popular in this event. We were able to dispense fuels of all kinds, including electrons. We were able to provide ice, water, food for people. Internet access was a big deal. And I just want to sort of focus on this for a second because it is really important. You know, in COVID-19, we've had to stick more to our homes. We've had to use telecommunications and internet connectivity more than ever. And so we have seen a sharp increase in the importance of telecommunications. But even before COVID, telco was increasingly core to running our most critical infrastructure. So it's now essential as a public utility alongside power, water, and others. And increasingly, it's the backbone that enables our systems to operate, especially our microgrids. We need to provide internet connectivity to these big pieces of equipment, these battery systems, the solar arrays, and we need to do that in emergencies and in normal times as well. And so because that connectivity allows them to operate and allows them to operate with more efficiency and more optimization. And so when I started to build microgrids, I incorrectly thought it was going to be more of a hardware approach, new wires, new transformers. It turned out to be half hardware, half software. And each component, the solar array, the battery storage, the control systems, needed that internet-enabled access. And cybersecurity of that access was an important component as well. And the microgrids, in turn, keep the telecommunications and the internet activity and connectivity powered up. And so it's now a codependency, in my view, if you're going to do these kinds of highly efficient distributed systems. As a colleague recently said to me, if you're in the energy business, you're also in the telecom business, but you may not know it yet. So telecom is increasingly important. It's increasingly important for tribes to get their arms around the regulatory and jurisdictional components of that as they're building out their energy systems as well. So the PSPS did its job. No wildfires. The microgrids did their job in this event, in that we were able to provide really robust regional support. Next slide, please.
Yeah, I'll give you a heads up. We're definitely going to be running a little bit over, just we got started a little bit late, but we're getting close to about 11:30. Yep.
I'm not going to go into much detail here, but I wanted it available for people. I think the big takeaways are that microgrids are fairly complex and expensive to build. They do require the amount of capacity internally or through partnerships that is somewhat equivalent to running a larger electrical grid. The ongoing discussion that I think is really important is to understand how microgrids dovetail with segmenting the larger grid to enable potentially larger and more cost-effective generation and storage facilities. The Blue Lake Rancheria is has a very small land base, and so we don't have a lot of space, literally, to build huge solar arrays. And so we think about, okay, if we want to continue to move these diesel generators out of the mix, replace with lower carbon forms of energy, we very quickly run up against a space issue. Other tribes are not in that position, but I do think that it's worth thinking about what is the size of your electrical wire loop and where can you build these individual microgrid components that Pilar showed in her overview slide to maximum effect and maximum cost efficiency. And then I think, as you've seen, microgrids serve one purpose in business as usual, probably economic optimization and greenhouse gas reductions. And then in emergencies, they really take on a different use case and benefit stack. And we need to understand how we can de-silo some of these funding streams to pair emergency preparedness with just sort of typical grid infrastructure investment to build these things where they'll be most effective. So I think those are the things I would focus on for now. Next slide, please. And this is the list of items that I think top level people need to add to their list of feasibility considerations, and I'll end by just saying that partnerships in these build outs are really important. They'll be strategic and long-term, so they should be something that the tribal nation feels good about. Next slide.
So you had a workforce development slide. I ended up just throwing it behind Liz's as well, but I don't know if we'll have time to cover it on your efforts with good alternatives in the Navajo Nation.
Yeah, we'll go forward later with that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. I really appreciate, I mean, just you know, the projects you're working on are just tremendous. I've certainly been following and learning lessons in the various microgrid projects that I'm working on down in Southern California. And so, you know, just keep up the good work. And I just look forward to, you know, actually gathering and sharing more information on what you're doing so other tribes can learn and benefit from it. So let me turn it over to you, Liz, and let me unmute you. There we go.
Great. Can you hear me?
And yeah, thank you, Liz. And I looking forward to hearing about what you have going on with workforce development.
Wonderful. So I wanted to, before I dive into more of the slides and that discussion, I first want to just point out the words energy resiliency, tribal energy resiliency. And it's important to take a closer look at just the word resiliency itself and think about it more in terms of economic resiliency, and think of it as tribal workforce, right? That we're talking about in training and also creating within a clean energy economy. And then of course, on the economic side, of course, is small business or tribal businesses as well. And building that tribal economic resiliency there within the clean energy economy. And then, of course, and this is a big one for me because of my experience in government, particularly state government as deputy secretary serving at Calvet, it's important to take a look at what tribal resiliency we can mean in the weeds of not just within tribal country, but also getting involved, making sure that we're working directly with state representation to ensure that tribal leaders are appointed within state agencies so that we do have a seat at the table whenever there's when we're creating policy as a state. And that's where those gaps begin, because we don't have a seat at the table. And it's important that we do take a look at promoting our tribal leadership and up and coming new generation of tribal leadership into these positions, and even creating policy that could possibly exist within our state that could be a requirement longer term. So in regards to the energy resiliency and microgrid projects, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we do as a whole. I started GCG back in originally 2009 and I started it because of the recession. I wanted to create my job after I transitioned from the military. But along with that, I wanted to also create jobs for not just myself, but veterans and underserved workforce. And a lot of that passion comes from where I come from, which is from Norfolk Rancheria, and understanding that there's a lot of underserved communities. And I knew that during that time, during the recession, there would be a lot of people that would be hard hit due to the recession. And even now, fast forward to 2020 with this pandemic, and then also because of the wildfires. And with that, we just evolved into many other portions, but most importantly, what we do at GC Green is do direct install of energy efficiency and renewable energy technology, and particularly focusing on creating jobs within the clean energy economy. We do a lot of consulting for utilities, utility agencies, and also, of course, we are focused on primarily energy issues. So not just as a licensed fee builder, we build projects, but also we do a lot of consulting, particularly even on this contract with the Tribal Gap Analysis for Strategic Growth Council. So what we're especially interested in is in supporting tribal microgrid opportunities and helping understand the gaps that are keeping tribes from developing future projects, future microgrid projects. And just some of the projects that we have worked on in the past is, well, I'll just kind of name the most significant ones off, is well, one of them is the construction in tribal country. We were a part of a group that spoke regarding resiliency is the new sustainability conference, and how to take a look at different wildfires and taking a look at it as a whole, and how to I would say be more reactive but proactive in that sense. And coming from Norfolk Rancheria, which is near Shaver Lake, which is in the exact center of California, back in 2018 we were hit with a lot of wildfires, but fast forward again today, we were really impacted. So this is something that, as we know, within tribal country, we are definitely impacted significantly to these wildfires and climate change issues as they arise. So that's a lot of my motivation there, to really focus on our resiliency here at home, and then also national energy security as a whole as well. Some of the other projects we worked on was on the California, geez, I'm drawing a blank here, but the California, it'll come to me. That's where we met, Josh, at Shumash when we did the training there. Energy Upgrade California, there you go. We did the Energy Upgrade California start. We rolled it out within the state. We did a lot of the training with our general contracting firms, so then they can go out and do the implementation statewide, which is still a program today. And we also trained a lot of tribes within tribal country. Right now, we are currently working on a project at San Isabel with their CARES Act funding to make them more resilient towards a lot of these wildfires, and looking at taking a look at putting backup batteries into Rancheria. And with one of our partners, Zenergy, we did some installs within tribal health communities, and also Pala. So just taking a look at what I would like to just quickly introduce. We're doing a project right now at Miramar Marine Base in San Diego. And one of the things that the California Energy Commission asked us to do with their microgrid project there is to better understand how we can involve veterans as part of the workforce and identify the opportunities, gaps, and awareness and training. And I thought this could be a lot similar to what we could do within tribal country, and creating workforce opportunities there. Maybe you can go possibly to the next slide. So taking a look at workforce opportunities within tribes, and we can possibly participate in identifying these gaps and capacity for current workforce, and resources to assist in workforce training, development training, and also placement. And some of the findings that we found at the Miramar project was, taking a look at the core microgrid implementation, workforce around the supply chain, understanding, because it's new technologies that were there, not even trying to understand what the supply chain looked like and what those needs were, and then building workforce around that. And then workforce supporting regulatory agencies and utilities. Some parts were well understood, such as workforce for solar components and microgrids, but less so for newer parts. But we're getting better at that, and those are some of the gaps that we're introducing there, and also addressing. So on training, there's also a lot of training programs at ASU that we were looking to tap into, possibly bring into or introduce towards Miramar's current project, and we're still taking a look at that as an opportunity. So all this is current that we're looking at, and again, these are things that we can also introduce within tribal country, and then also taking a look at assisting what available funding that is out there, private funding, and or also within grants and taking a look at really focusing on what opportunities are there for the tribes, and then seeing what grants might lie and planning it out for the future. So that's, really where we're at right now. And I'm, again, happy to be a part of this discussion and continuing to move forward, and also ensuring that there's equity within these microgrid projects as we move forward as a state and also a nation.
Thank you, Liz. Thank you for sharing that information and just for the tremendous work that you're doing. And look forward to both learning and sharing more of this as we proceed with the California Tribal Gap Analysis Project. So, Jen, I'm going to skip over this right now and just move on to the funding and resources. We don't have much time here, and I've covered this in other presentations before, some of which are included on the California Tribal Gap Analysis website, but I was going to share a bit more, some information on what we use to fund the San Pasqual Tribal Government Microgrid Complex, which just broke ground a few weeks ago, and then in planning the more complex Rincon Resort Area Microgrid. And so, but it's really been a combination of starting with DOE funding in both cases. They have their annual funding opportunity that's available for tribes for deployment of energy, and there's been an increasing emphasis on microgrids. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. I believe that they're looking to relax the cost share requirements if the tribes can demonstrate need, which is something they have not really done in the past, and even relaxing it for if you're a recipient this past year as well. But the DOE has technical assistance available for tribes as well to get started, and even considering doing feasibility studies. And you can go on the line and apply. It's free, and I would encourage you to do that. I've not used technical assistance, but I've worked with tribes in securing several tribal energy deployment grants. With the Rincon project, moving over to the state of California, we received an EPIC grant, just like from the California Energy Commission, just like the Blue Lake Rancheria did for the most recent round of long duration energy storage for the Rincon system. And that was about $7 million there. And the combination of Rincon DOE funding has been $3 million. And so, significant money. We've been pairing that with the CPUC's SGIP self-generation incentive program energy storage rebates, which is still significant and available in other IOUs except for PG&E. The money's run out from PG&E territory for the equity resilience budget, but I've also covered that elsewhere, and so I'm happy to share more information if you want to follow up. But I think even just getting started, there's a BIA right now has its Energy and Minerals Development Program grants that are available. I think they're due, somewhere around December. I'll pull it up right here. You actually can go to the DOE's website that has a lot of these opportunities we're talking about. So you could do get some money for feasibility studies and initial planning from the BIA or Department of Interior. Those are due on the 2nd of December. The DOE's Energy Deployment Grant actually just been pushed back again. Now the deadline is February 11th. As you've been following that, you've seen that get pushed back since, I believe, May or so to now February. Hopefully it stays there. And there's other funding opportunities that are available here as well. So I will hyperlink this in the slides that I send around so you can get more information. But there's a lot of funding opportunities out there, I think, to at least get started, and you can get creative in this as well. Another potential opportunity is the FEMA Building Resilient Infrastructure in Communities, if you can direct it to mitigating disaster impacts as well. Jana, did you want to add anything briefly on the funding and technical assistance and other resources?
I think that this is a really good start of a list. Certainly as we get, as each tribal nation gets more deeply into the initial phases of the project, other funding opportunities might be available depending on just the structure of each project. But the other thing I want to say is that, at the federal level, and this actually was, it's based on a California Energy Commission model. We're pushing for the concept of essentially a direct revolving loan fund for energy and other infrastructure upgrades, probably from Treasury, that is modeled after the California, Tom, you can help me out here with the, oh, I have it, the Energy Conservation Assistance Act, the low interest loans for, that are basically 0% or 1% interest for, depending on what the use is for. Other revolving loan funds of this kind, because most of the time we're talking about tribal nations developing government-owned and operated infrastructure, whether it's done directly by the government, whether it's done by a governmental economic enterprise, or whether it's done by a utility authority that the tribal government forms. The net result is social and economy enabling infrastructure, and there's nothing that's more important than energy. So we're pushing for some of this simplified kind of direct access funding that would be just so much more useful than, I think, some of the bigger sources of funding like bonds or some of these loan guarantee programs that have absolutely no tribes taking advantage of them because they're too complicated and they're not in practice achieving the goals that that they're designed to achieve. And so just wanted to let you guys know that those kinds of things, I think, are definitely on the menu, especially with the change in federal administration now, and we'll be working on it. Thanks so much.
Hey, Josh, really quickly, Jana, you'd brought up the loan program that we have at the Energy Commission, and unfortunately, currently, the way that enabling legislation is written, tribes aren't eligible for that loan program, and that's unfortunate. I can't say much more than that. Watch our legislation. There's a move to amend that and make tribes eligible for that loan package.
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic, Tom. I brought it up. Thank you for adding that, because I think that's super important, and yet another example of how the state is really working to engage tribes and create partnerships with tribes in these areas. And I also use it as a model for the loan program itself. There's no reason that that a loan program of this kind can't be enacted federally for tribal nations, and maybe even generate a small return for taxpayers as well. So, you know, it's revenue neutral or positive, and we need more simplified financing mechanisms for this core infrastructure. I'll get off my my soapbox there, but I mean it.
Great information. It's great information, and hopefully, hopefully there's both options in the future, both federally and at the state level, for funding these types of projects through revolving loans. So thank you both, Tom and Jennifer, for pushing those. I also would like to mention too that it's worth considering private funding. So whether it's just kind of traditional loans from banks, particularly if the tribe has an existing loan relationship with a bank, and we're working on the Rincon project right now, considering a tax equity partner in our a project to be able to support funding and bringing in the tax equity benefits that tribes are otherwise not eligible for, the investment tax credit and the depreciation, and that could actually be having our cake and eating it too. So I think I found too, one last point on this is that just getting one of these can then lead to opportunities to others. So we got the 2019 DOE grant, which then we leveraged to get the CEC grant of $7 million, and then we added another DOE grant of $1 million on top of it, and then the SCHIP rebate came in, and this is just the major Rincon project. Then the SCHIP rebates are coming in the millions of dollars range. So it's just the tribe had a resilience need and was seeking funding to develop the infrastructure, and then it just, as we got further along, these opportunities presented themselves, and we were in the position to strike and leverage those resources to get more resources. But I'm happy to share more about that project in other forums. So I want to remind you, please, we really want to encourage you to get involved in the Tribal Gap Analysis Project. We'll certainly be reaching back out to you. We want you to share your voice to help, inform the state in its attempts to develop resources and funding and other opportunities for tribes in the clean energy and climate space. Please go to our website and please register your interest on the form that's available there, and participating in both the pilot questionnaire and then in the full questionnaire once it's released. I thank those who chosen to stay. We do have a few questions, and this is being recorded as well, so you can feel free to drop off if you'd like to. But I don't. Paul, are you still on? There's one initial question on the CPUC microgrid proceeding. Okay, well, I think one thing we'll do, since Pilar is not available, and I think a lot of them are for her, what we'll do is we'll follow up and we'll provide responses, written responses, or recorded responses to these questions. And so, again, I really appreciate everybody for participating here today. I really appreciate all the speakers making the time to share this important information. Thank you, Pilar, Jana, Liz, Tom, thank you for joining us as well. And I'm excited to continue these conversations and help see more successful tribal microgrid and other energy projects, and to gather more information to hopefully bring more resources to kind of keep this snowball rolling for more great projects. So thank you very much, everybody, and take care.
Thanks, everybody.